The band worked really well together. I mean, they were there to make a record. They were all into the tunes, so it was a question of everybody pulling their weight and doing what they needed to do. I think the most difficult thing was ordering lunch and figuring out what we were going to eat. But as far as the music goes, that was totally cool. We had a good time putting that together. The band worked really well together during the recording process. I mean, given that we'd been together for a month or so writing and doing pre-production, there was a few tense moments, but nothing really that had any consequence on the end result. The most difficult thing was ordering lunch, but for the recording, it was a lot of fun, and all the parts went down really well. I have a few favorites on that record, but I think one of them being The 11th Hour. That was a lot of fun. It goes through a lot of different changes, a lot of different parts and dynamics. So it was quite the challenge to put together, and so like 11 minutes long or something. So it took a lot of preparation. I was intrigued by this Q sound, which was becoming very popular at the time we were mixing Parallels. And I know Sting had used it, Madonna had used it, and it was the high rollers were using it. And it was an expensive process, and it's a system of changing phase and time delays in very minute amounts, and being able to move things around the room. So you could take things in a stereo spectrum and actually put them outside of the stereo spectrum, which I thought was just the most amazing thing, and certainly was. Gives you much more spatiality, shall we say. So I really wanted to use this on Parallels because I thought the material just lent itself tremendously, especially in tunes like The 11th Hour, lent themselves to this extra width and depth. You could actually have things behind you and outside of the stereo, which I thought was a real plus. And then, of course, we got into the Q sound thing with the mixing of the record. And I had wanted to get into the Q sound thing for a while, and it was at that time was a very expensive process. It was really only the seriously high rollers that could afford to do it, because you had to hire the equipment and have an operator on standby and fly them in, hotels. I mean, it was just a really, really huge expense. But it seemed to me that if you could record it to a stereo mix, then if I prepared all the parts that I needed, I could record all those individual parts to a stereo mix and then incorporate them in my final mix once I got down to the mixing process. So I actually rented the Q Sound rig for one day only, and went through it from beginning to end, the whole record on multi-track, and just picked a couple of tracks to record on. I recorded all the net results of the Q sound on it, and then mixed those into my final mix on the during the recording process. And it worked really well. And I think it gave the record a slight twist sonically that it desired. It was a good call. Yeah, it's cool. You can actually you can get it on a card now. Neat. Or like download it. I think it's $500. It was a Canadian company, and they were destined to go big places with this thing. But the thing was, it was limited only to the artists with tons of cash, because you'd probably, if you were going to take 1 to 2 weeks to mix, or even longer in some cases, it would sit in the control room for the entire time. You had a daily rate on the gear, plus an operator, plus all the expenses and per diems and everything for that operator. So it was outrageously expensive. And it would have been more than our whole budget. Ray was certainly into his vocals, but the biggest problem I had with Ray was getting him into the studio to do those vocals. He was always AWOL. It's like, where's Ray? And we could never find him. And it was like, it didn't matter what time of day or night it was, he was always out somewhere doing something with somebody. And but when I finally got him into the studio, he sang so well. It was great. It was just great. It was a real pleasure. Took us a little time to figure out which microphone really suited his voice, and once we'd done that, we were off and running. But as I say, getting him into the studio was the difficulty.
Cool. And do you want to talk about any other band members, or?
Yeah, I guess I could.
Is there a manager that you want to talk about? Is there?
No, not really.
Yeah, okay.
No. I can talk about Mark Zonder. Mark Zonder was the little computer in the band. I always thought of him as a computer. He had the most amazing ability for time. Being a drummer was a good thing, but just over and above anything I'd ever experienced before. I mean, he would write these parts and be able to play them absolutely perfectly. You know, some of the parts we sequenced, or he sequenced, and would play against those sequences. But even the parts he was playing were extremely hard to count. I found it really taxing at times trying to keep up with his bar counts. But he was our resident computer timekeeper.
Any crazy parties?
No, we never had any crazy parties. They weren't. We were busy working all the time, long hours, and didn't have time for that.